Hi, my name is Gretchen Hahn, and I'm a recruiting specialist in the Graduate College of Engineering.
Hi, I'm Hanumant Singh. I'm a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering with a joint appointment in Mechanical and Industrial Engineering.
And this is the Faculty 5. Hi Hanu, how are you doing?
Good, thanks Gretchen. Thanks for coming out.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Can you tell me a little bit about your research?
What I work on is what we call field robotics. So we build robots and then we take them out all over the world. Locally, of course, around Boston, but the Arctic, the Antarctic, every single ocean you can name. And we have fun doing that.
What are these robots doing in Antarctica?
Robotics right now is this burgeoning field. But 25 years ago, it was much, much smaller. And in those times, we were really working in areas where you couldn't really do much with human beings. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to put a human being under the ice shelf in Antarctica, even though you want to make measurements of the ice shelf. We started off by building these robots called autonomous underwater robots. It's a free-swimming robot. You drop it to the side of a ship. It goes out and does a mission, and you pray, and then hopefully you get it back.
That's amazing. Okay, and so they're in the ocean, and they're going to Antarctica. Have you run into any problems with
we use them all over. Mm-hmm. And everywhere we use them. So we use them in Puerto Rico to look at coral reefs and how they're degrading. We use them, off the west coast of the U.S. to look at fisheries. In fact, we're based right out of, we have strong collaborations in Seattle with the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, because they also have one of our robots and they use it for that. So we use it for that. In Antarctica, we were really interested in seeing how sea ice is changing. The problem with sea ice is you can measure it from satellites and look at it from the top, but nobody has a good sense by just looking at that data in terms of how thick the ice is. So, the old way of doing it is you go out on the ice floe and you drill a hole and you measure how big that hole is, and that's got all sorts of problems with it. So the sea ice people came to us and said, hey, can you go out and, make measurements from the underside looking up? And so that's what we've done a lot of. And that was one of the first expeditions we did to Antarctica, and as soon as you're successful at that, all sorts of other things happen. They say, hey, can you come out and look at, invasive species and how they're going up the coast in Antarctica? Can you come out and look at penguin populations on these islands, which are really, very remote and nobody's really surveyed? And there we use, drones or unmanned aerial systems. And what's really interesting about all this is, this is somewhat esoteric science, mm-hmm. but we always take our students with us. And our students really enjoy that. And more importantly, they get real life lessons in terms of robotic systems. There are not very many people who are building more robots to go under ice, but the same students who are doing that are working for car companies and doing autonomous driving. Okay, they're also working on all sorts of other kinds of robots within the warehouse, in the biomedical industry, because a lot of the algorithms and the problems we face translate very well to industrial settings.
Wow.
So you wouldn't know it, but a real interesting problem that shows up with imaging ice and snow is that it's low contrast. Mm. And so we've been working on that for a long period of time. And same with mud on the seafloor, it's very low contrast. And it turns out, the biomedical industry also has to deal with low contrast inside the human body. So a lot of the techniques we use, work very well across the board there. And so the whole idea behind, doing these things is that, we're setting up our grad students so they get real world experiences in terms of building systems, using them, deploying them, coming up with new algorithms to use them, understanding the nitty gritty, how do you calibrate this camera so that it just does a better job? Doing all that in settings that we think are important and have social relevance, but that also translate to jobs within the industrial world.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's amazing, and there's so much student involvement right off the bat, and getting to do that in the field. What does it look like for students in the classroom in comparison to what they're doing in the field?
So that's another interesting question you asked, because what separates our program from pretty much every other program is that when I came here, God, how long ago was that? 7 or 8 years ago, and we first started this program 5 or 6 years ago. One thing we wanted to do, which would separate us from everybody else, is that we said we will focus on real systems and real sensors. So in our classroom. Here's a great example as an anecdote. I was teaching this class on robotic sensing and navigation, and we said, you know what, why don't we, as your final project, you can take out a car and go map out areas in the South End. And they said, okay, what kind of car? I'm like, it's a real car, it's an autonomous car. And they said, is it a simulation? No, it's not a simulation, it's a real car. And they said, is it an RC car? And then we had the TA drive a Lincoln MKZ with all the sensors on it out. And the students came out and they were like, oh my God, and they were taking selfies with it. And after that, though, they got to actually use it. And there's a great story there. I was talking to one of my students, and he said, Professor, I was interviewing with this autonomous car company, and I showed them the data, and they said, where did you get this data? And he said, I collected it. They said, you collected this data? He says, yeah, I collected this data. And they didn't believe him. And he said, I pulled out my project report, I showed them the car, I showed them how we went out in the South, and he says, I got that co-op, and then he got a job with that company. So I think that's what's really cool and interesting about us. It was like, look, all these other universities, yes, they have autonomous cars, they're using them for research. We have an autonomous car. It's there for our first year graduate students in the MS program to use in their first class. And that's what we really want to push.
Right. Well, thanks for chatting with me, Hanu.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Okay, great.